This is Naked by the Future Farm, where entrepreneurship is stripped to its vulnerable core. Brought to you by Vladi and Nektarios Lolios. And remember to subscribe, follow, and rate Naked to help us share it with the world.
Hello,
Hey.
Vladi with the yellow background.
Hello, Nektarios with the yellow shirt.
How are you today?
I'm better. I'm better now because I talked to you prior to this recording, and I sort of poured my soul on the plate and shared it with you, and you were kind enough to listen. So I'm feeling actually, I'm feeling lighter and excited about reconnecting because I feel like we haven't talked for a while, man.
I think we said this in the last episode that we recorded between the two of us. Is we're
Really?
using this now just to talk because we're so busy.
Yeah.
What's the weather like in Pakistan? Is there still a heat wave going on?
It is, especially in the parts around Lahore, so close to borders with India. I'm right now in Karachi, which has the sea, so we get the breeze, and evenings are actually really lovely. So when we can, we get a sort of a can of beer and sit on a bench occasionally, right? Because of all the reasons why you can't really get a beer here. But that's lovely. So I'm actually enjoying the time here. And I've been traveling in the last week, and lots has been happening on a personal level, which we hopefully are able to disclose and share with you guys also. Catherine, I'm just going to say this. Catherine asked me, like our editor, whether we are ready to talk about this, and I said, let's see, maybe in a year. I know I'm sort of putting this teaser out there, and it's not, I mean, it's big, but it's not, it's not a massive secret for everybody's lives.
You just don't make sense right now.
I think I know. So maybe we should just cut this thing out and basically just say there has been some news on a personal level. We'll share when ready. I think let's leave it at this one.
So last night I was having a dinner with my husband. It was a wedding anniversary, and it was lovely. And there was this table of 4 people behind way, and suddenly there was this commotion. It was 2 couples, and this woman was standing and crying, and they were all Italian, and she was just saying,
"Oh wow,
non è vero, it isn't true." And I was looking at them trying to figure out, and without looking, and goes, okay, one of them's pregnant. And I was like, what? And I was trying to figure out the connections. And I think he was right. I think it was 2 couples, and one of the couples told the other couple that they're pregnant, and the 2 guys, they just hugged, and it was cool. But the one woman just couldn't process the information that her friend was pregnant. So I'm not saying that you're pregnant, but the big news was just suddenly this big thing. Yeah, there's a connection.
No, but I like the fact that we can leave it out there, and maybe somebody will even send me some messages. Let's see.
Anyway, let's zoom into the future farm.
So how are you feeling coming to Future Farm? I'm curious, maybe to start with the question of how are you feeling about sort of the last few weeks where we went into a number of conversation exploring this whole subject of neurodiversity. I know that you had few more conversations when you were talking one-on-one with Nick. And it's a big one for me. So, but I want to start with you first. So, yeah.
Maybe we should also just kind of point out which episodes we're talking about. So we had Nick Cavuoto, who talked about ADD. We had Sam Handfield-Jones, who talked about ADHD, and we actually recorded an episode that will be released after this one, where we thought we're going to talk about neurodiversity, but we ended up not talking about it. So there's a bit of room. It's interesting. For me, it was fascinating for a number of reasons, because we had people who were very happy to share their experience, and they were very good at describing their experience. But also there was a lot of learning, and we talked about this briefly, that we both actually didn't know much. So I feel intrigued, and also we haven't talked about this, Vladi, but I had dinner with Michael Freeman, right? So
oh wow.
And we talked a little bit about this as well, because he's got his own research on the subject, right? So maybe as a headline, I think us talking about neurodiversity, what I realize is probably a lot more important in the context of entrepreneurship that we acknowledge, because within the entrepreneurial world, it's a much more prevalent subject that people realize.
I remember when Michael said to us that so many entrepreneurs that he can see out of his experience that should have been diagnosed, in his own words, with some sort of neurodiversity, but they've never been. And like, so you're right. I mean, the prevalence within this sort of group of individuals and profession and lifestyle it's bigger, comparable to any other.
I also happened, just coincidence, listening to a couple, because I like my stand-up comedy, and I've been listening to a bunch of podcasts with people, and this was pure coincidence, who somewhere in the conversation, they mentioned that they were diagnosed with autism late in life. And again, I think it's interesting because also the whole kind of, it seems to be in the stand-up world, not an unusual phenomenon, right? And there is something about being diagnosed when you're young versus being diagnosed when you're old. When we shared the episode with Sam on social media, a friend of mine who was following the Future Farm, who works in banking, she commented that one of her son has ADHD, and she was relating to Sam's experience about how you feel when you're taking the medication, how you feel when you're not taking the medication. So suddenly you realize, of course, in your everyday life, you're surrounded by people who may or may not experience something similar, right?
Yeah. So that part was sort of a big aha for me, especially from the conversation with Sam, where towards the end, we talk more about, okay, so we are founders and leaders of teams and entrepreneurs ourselves. And it made me reflect on, so there might be people within my team, even within my co-founders, which actually is true. One of my co-founders in me has been diagnosed with dyslexia since he was young, and he's very vocal about it. Somehow, this is also interesting how we process those things, right? So somehow when he's talking about dyslexia and he's very open about it, it's sort of taken, I can see how we take it as a absolutely no problem, normal thing. It's just we learn, he shares. There was like no emotional sort of reaction that would go towards the space like, okay, or something is wrong. And it was interesting through the conversation with Sam, where when we talk about autism, where we talk about ADHD, and I think this is the power of the words. We're using the words like disorder, dysfunction, right? Immediately invokes, at least in me, this like, certainly something is broken, like something is wrong. And that was one of the, I actually now derail, but that was one of the big takeaways for me, which was like, we should rethink and hopefully reboot the way we talk about these things, because the power we give it, and when we even introduce the concept, when we introduce part of ourselves that is unique, and we even learn like from so many people, this is strengths. And it's just basically part of us that we're learning about it as anything else. So that was a big one for me. And the other one was, yes, to sort of put a mirror into my own environment and be more like, are there people around me where I'm not aware? Should I be aware? What can I do to make it more authentic, inclusive, nurturing for those people around me, especially the team? And I still don't know the answers, to be honest. I love the one answer Sam offered, which was flexibility. And honestly, I even took it back to the team and we talked about it here in Pakistan. And the flexibility, I think, is such a powerful concept, because in some way, I feel like it introduces curiosity. It introduces or invites question, right? And then be like, okay, so what can we do around it? And it's not a copy-paste solution for everybody. But I still do feel like sometimes it's hard for me to even remember what ADHD actually means in the actual words. Like I know what it means, but so is that I am very honest about the fact that I feel very much with a beginner mindset around the subject.
It's a little bit, I've come across this a few times now in the last year, where you talk to people from a different cultural context who haven't really experienced much beyond their culture. And the assumption is that everything works around the world like in the country you live in, because it's the only reality you know. And suddenly you go somewhere else and you realize, no, other people do it completely different, and that's normal too. And so I started exploring the whole subject of neurodiversity. Felt a little bit like I'm getting on this train for the first time in my life into a country I've never been to. And I'm going, oh my God, it looks different here. But for the people who live in this world, this is the default. This is the mainstream, right? So it's about understanding, which curiosity comes into that, right? But at the same time, if you spend all your life with this one paradigm, and you kind of acknowledge, or you maybe observe these things in the fringes of your world, it's realizing that it's not a fringe, but you need to kind of put some effort in. And when we talk, the episode we were releasing the week after this to Drew, I had to learn just to wait, because it just takes more time to think, right? But we're just not used to in this, kind of 3 male co-founders, all with a fair amount of testosterone. You just need to kind of train yourself to be patient. And when somebody else comes into this conversation, you need to inform them that this is part of the way we operate, so they don't get weirded out about why is everybody just silent and one of the guys on the Zoom call has got his eyes closed, right? So very much exploration.
Yeah,
very much.
But the powerful thing with Drew, which is, by the way, Nektarios co-founder in his other fintech business, so just for people who don't know. So what I find powerful about his example is that he took the responsibility and he talked to you about it. And he was very, at least that's how I understood it. And maybe so you can correct it, but I understood that, okay, might not be as much true, but even yesterday with my NEAM team, we talked about the fact that there is some level of responsibility on, if I have specific needs or I function in a certain way that I'm aware of, I believe, as Vladi, I do believe that I have some level of responsibility to talk about it with my team if I want our environment to adjust to it to some level where possible, and for people to respect it. And I'm saying this with all the sort of acknowledgement that this is my personal subjective view. I'm ready to be challenged, but that's how I see it. And that's what I appreciated when I heard Drew to say, hey, this is how I operate. And then you guys adjusted your culture and stuff, right? Because there was a conversation going on. I somehow feel that in some areas of us as selves, our identities, it's much easier than the others. So I'm still trying to find a way how, for instance, even have that conversation with my team about learning about their needs, maybe inviting and creating that inclusive space and say, it's okay. Like we are, for instance, now building a new office here in Pakistan. So we send out an anonymous survey asking people to share their needs. And as I wanted to make it inclusive and again, safe, we consciously made it anonymous. But at the same time, I was thinking, you know what? I wish ideally I wouldn't have to do this anonymous. I would love for people to feel safe, right? And I know that there is an evolution, etc. All that said is that even as a leader, as a founder, entrepreneur, I'm still thinking about how to sort of approach this within our own teams.
So when you were talking about this, I remembered, and it's interesting because I hadn't really connected the dots, that in my previous business, we had one colleague who told us really quick early on after joining that for me to produce, she was a designer, and she was like, for me to do the job that you want me to do, this is the process I need you to follow. And it was quite restrictive. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't positioned as these are my personal needs, right? Mm-hmm. But ultimately, looking back, there was a clear articulation of, I need this to happen to be able to produce the work. But most people couldn't understand. Most people say, well, what's this? Why are you introducing extra bureaucracy or process? We're a startup and moving fast, blah, blah. And I wish we had a moment of acknowledgement, which ultimately I'm kind of backwards interpreting here, but there was an element of acknowledging that I'm functioning differently, and therefore everything that doesn't follow this process is overwhelming to me. So I need to have that structure. You need to come to me with that structure, otherwise I can't respond, right? The other end of the spectrum, of course, is that there are people on the other side who find structure terrifying, right? Mm-hmm. And I remember the conversation we had with Sam, that he didn't give the same example in a recording, but the pre-chat where he said, I can't work through a shopping list.
Yeah.
But when my wife comes home and goes, why didn't you do the thing that we said you would do? He goes, I don't know, but I've retiled the fireplace, right? Which is a much bigger task, but a task that he can completely immerse himself in, right? Mm-hmm. And hearing these things and hearing from people who are very aware that there was a list, that there was a task, but also that knowing that this is bullet points are terrifying, a huge project that will absorb you for a week is for me quite alien, because I'm the opposite, right? I'm very much like, oh, you've said 5 things, let's create a list out of that.
Yeah.
You like lists?
I like lists, although I'm listening to this audiobook, which is talking about concept of time and how actually pushing through the anxiety of not doing things that you have on the list, but actually straight away getting into your priorities and not waiting till you get the other small things done, and only then, because that will most probably never happen, right? So the things that we actually really want to do, I know this is a different subject, but I actually wanted to share this, which was when I was listening to the other book, I was like, yes, I know this feeling. There are some exciting big things that you want to do, and somehow they're too exciting. There's that sort of emotional connection to it that you feel, I only want to do it when I'm ready, when I have that space to really focus, enjoy it. And hence they get pushed out and you never do it. So anyhow, so I'm, all that said, I'm revisiting my relationship with lists. But there was something else I wanted to react to, which was, I guess it's just this, yes, I know it comes back to self-reflection and self-awareness, right? Because one thing I wanted to ask you is that when we talked a lot about, okay, how can I help people in my team, and maybe be able to recognize this in others, be able to listen to their needs, accept, bring it in, and design something for them. The other question for me was, have you explored this within yourself? Because some of the signals that Sam was, for instance, sharing, they seemed familiar to me. And I'm not saying in no way that, like, okay, but the truth is, like, I have not explored actively with anybody whether I might have some specific needs. You know what I'm trying to say, maybe in a complicated way, but like, this is what Michael Freeman, that so many of us are walking around the world not knowing ourselves enough, hence not being able to design, I guess, the world around us in a more nurturing way. Have you thought about this?
Yes. You put a lot on the table. I'll start with the self-awareness piece. So with the example I use with my former colleague, I think there's an element there where they might have been aware of their needs, but they might not have used terminology that labels it in a way that other people can understand it. And I think for us, generally, it's easier to deal with something if somebody says, look, there's a label for this and therefore you need to do it, not just because I want it or I need it. So there was that weird disconnect, which I think in itself is a whole kind of worth a conversation. I think I observed myself when I was having the conversations with Nick and with Sam, kind of scanning a little bit myself, going, but there's this thing where if somebody goes, I have a food intolerance or I have an allergy, and you go, yeah, sometimes I get a bit of an itchy palate when I have a hazelnut. So I was also very conscious of not wanting to kind of immerse myself into somebody else's reality. I've spent a fair amount of reflection and analysis over the last 20 odd years to know that I have a particular way of doing things. And I know that I think I know the things that overwhelm me and the things that don't. I never have felt the desire to have it labeled or diagnosed or call it what you like. But for me, it falls more into the conversation. If you talk about diversity, right? It's just recognizing that other people function differently for whatever reason, and try and negotiate how you deal with the differences, right? So, I mean, I've used the example of one of my co-founders who can be quite literal in situations, which is really difficult for me, who is the complete opposite. And I know that in my personal relationship with Wei, it took a while for Wei to realize that when I say something that is very vague, that it's deliberately vague because I don't have a strong view on this, or maybe within the next sentence I will say the opposite because I'm exploring the duality of all things, and I love things that are that there's a duality or multifaceted, and Wei can be quite literal sometimes. So he expects for me to communicate with him in a way that makes sense to him. So it was a negotiation. So there's the stuff that we do and the way that we are for me, but it's also the way we communicate. And
yeah, big time.
Yeah. So, and it's all beautiful, but it's also ridiculously messy, right? What about you then? So when you were saying, when you were asking,
I feel like I would like to invite on Naked somebody who can answer some of those questions for us, who I can ask about how do I even start exploring some of those areas. How can I invite others to do so? What is maybe what's the right word here? You see, sometimes it's getting stuck on words, because words is so much of value. I mean, this is honestly, one of the biggest sort of takeaways for me from the overall history of Naked is how much words have a value and how much of value they define. And it's scary. But now I lost it. I'm losing my threads.
Ultimately,
today.
you were going into a direction about,
Yes, I like my ask is for having to continue this conversation. That's I think what I feel like would like. Whether it's on Naked, I think would be beautiful on Naked. So let's see what we can do. But yeah, I still feel like I'm entering this beautiful, as you said, the train maybe. And I'm just looking around right now and touching and feeling things. And I feel it's also my own responsibility to make conscious effort to understand this deeply. I certainly want to do that. So that's sort of where I am right now. The last bit that came to my mind was, how do you deal with this? Or I would love to hear some stories where people, neurodivergent entrepreneurs, and their experiences with fundraising. Like, are there instances and experiences that are complete tension, sort of root causes of tension? How do you navigate the conversation with investors, which feels to me such an alien world where I'm not even sure whether people are interested to understand, but that's something that I think could be also interesting. And Sam made me think about it a little bit when we were closing the conversation, right? And after everything he told us, how difficult is it for him to sit in one place for like over an hour and concentrate, and then we unconsciously, or actually consciously, we asked him to be in one place for over an hour and have a conversation with us. And he said, it's hard for me to do it unless it's very interesting. So I was like, I hope this was engaging. But then the idea of maybe we could have recorded while he's walking, or all of those things start popping into our mind. And that made me think that there might be situations where, as an entrepreneur, you need your funding, for instance, you fundraise, and the environment might be pretty hostile to any of your needs. And I feel like that's probably also a big sort of space to explore and raise awareness about.
I think it's wonderful that we actually managed to get people on the podcast who talk about this publicly, because that's the first step towards saying, look, there's a world that functions differently and it's as valid, but you need to learn about this. So also taking on that responsibility to say, if I want people to understand me, I need to show people how it works. I need to show people how I work, right?
Yes.
And sometimes it's not easy. Sometimes it gets a bit tiring. I kind of relate to this to some extent from my LGBT experience, where there's points where you go, you know what? Also, I don't want to be the spokesperson. I'm not part of the committee, you know, and it's not, I don't have a role. But I also feel that sometimes you just need to educate people. And even if it goes, okay, I'm going to have this conversation again about when did you come out for the 500th time, I still have it, because maybe this will help somebody be more understanding, more open-minded, more respectful, whatever, in the future. And I really value the fact that both Nick and Sam, but also Drew, talk about their experience of life, because they realize that somebody will hear it and go, okay, I had no idea. Maybe I should be more open with my team, or maybe I should be more mindful when I meet somebody who just looks weird to me in the first instance, but recognizing, because these people that we talk to, they see this as a super strength, right? Which it is, if you position it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess beyond relying on others, because I hear you very much, and I've heard this before often, on why do I have to be this spokesperson? And you made me reflect, and I'm feeling like, you know what, now we've had the privilege of some people being brave enough, courageous, and actually making the effort. They want to expose themselves and share. And I'm thinking, you know what, Vladi, now it's your turn to read up on this. I don't have to rely and wait till somebody tells me about their, you know, vulnerable selves always. So I guess there is that combination. Would love to hear the views of you guys out there who are listening to this. Please do send us emails or comments. Always, it's really lovely to hear from you.
What is always, Vladi?
Today?
Yes.
Yes.
It's been. I enjoyed this.
Same here. And I can feel we are both curious, passionate, and open to learn more. Open.
So
awesome.
Thanks everybody for listening. And the next episode is going to be the one with Drew that we referenced. So might be a couple of things in there that you might have not expected.
Yes. Please do listen in.
Okay. Bye, Vladi.
Okay. Ciao. Bye.
Bye-bye. You've been listening to Naked by The Future Farm, where entrepreneurship is stripped to its vulnerable core. To learn more about our work, sign up to our newsletter or visit thefuturefarm.co, where you can also apply to be a naked guest. And remember, subscribe, follow, and rate Naked to help share it with the world.